So welcome to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with marketplace founders and leaders as guests on our group chats every Tuesday. So this is actually episode 8, and I'm excited to welcome on Dave Liu, who's currently the co-founder at Paired. So Paired helps restaurants with staffing needs and is actually used by some of the top restaurants. Before Paired, Dave was actually at marketplaces like Lux, which was acquired, Fanpop, which is actually also acquired, in eBay. So warm welcome, Dave. And let's maybe start off by you sharing more on your background and how you first got into marketplaces.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Mike. I don't know that I plan on getting into marketplaces. I started off as a consultant and went into work at Yahoo as a product manager. So my background was in product, and then this was in the late '90s. And then from there, I worked at Sony in New York doing some biz dev stuff, and then came back to go to Stanford for business school, California. While there, I worked at eBay. Actually, I worked at Apple, and then I decided to work at eBay. So very risk averse. Went to very safe places, just I think it was when I was at eBay I started learning more about the two-sided marketplaces and how to acquire supply and demand. I was working with affiliates and affiliate marketing to try to drive more demand, drive more buyers, and so this was all growth acquisition, trying to find ways to generate new eBay customers. And so we were, these were clever guys sitting in boxes, like in their boxers in their basements or their mom's homes or whatever. And they were doing anything from, this was when keyword portfolio, optimization, basically folks who would have been hedge fund managers were optimizing for keywords on Google. And there was huge arbitrage back then. And then affiliate marketing, where people would just come with all sorts of, for better or worse, kind of schemes or ways to get folks to sign up for eBay, because we would be paying out a $35 bounty for every new user that signed up. So they would come up with any and every way, and a lot of them potentially fraudulent ways that we found to get paid. But I mean, we'd be cutting checks for like millions of dollars to some of these folks. And so, I mean, a lot of them, it's funnily enough, they've gone on to start pretty significant companies too. They started off these are the folks who are really scrappy, really creative. And honestly, for all the founders out there, I highly recommend anyone who, I'm not saying that you should find people who've done shady stuff, but the folks who do affiliate marketing and in that kind of realm, a lot of them are very strong hustlers and very creative in terms of thinking of very unorthodox ways to acquire users. You have to set boundaries for them, but you're not going to find folks who are more kind of clever in terms of using the technology out there and understanding how to just get people to your site. So, in terms of if you were to contract with someone or whatnot, there might be some folks who would have really good ideas on that front. But so I did that, but then I realized I was not happy working at a big company. I felt like a cog. My director even told me he was running M&A for eBay and got demoted because he told Meg Whitman that she was overpaying for PayPal. And so that didn't, and obviously PayPal turned out to be all right. But I think it was more hey, don't rock the boat. If our headquarters were to blow up tomorrow, eBay would still make millions of dollars. And that's when I said, why am I driving an hour and a half from San Francisco to San Jose if it doesn't even matter that I'm here? So then I decided to go join a startup in the city that was acquired by Cisco, and it was about 30 to 40 people, called Pure Digital. I don't know if anyone's old enough to remember the flip camcorders, but that's what they made. And then I decided, after seeing that, to start my own company, my first company, Fanpop, which was entertainment based. And we built it. It was basically a user-generated platform. I don't know, the size of everyone's companies here, but we had four guys for the whole time we were in business for 9 years, and we were generating, a few million bucks. And it was all organic SEO. It was another way to acquire, to users that allowed us to be very lean. But that's another way that I think everyone should consider. Always optimize for SEO. Free traffic, organic traffic is the best traffic, and it also is evergreen, and it'll keep, it's a gift that keeps on giving. The longer you have kind of evergreen content or things that get indexed, data or content that gets indexed, um, that will be around for a long time. The only downside to that is if Google ever changes algorithms, it can hurt you. So you can't rely 100% on it. But um, yeah, free traffic is the best traffic. So did that for a long time. We sold a lot of ads to CPG companies and studios in Hollywood, and it was a great time for me to learn. I was wearing many hats because there's only four of us, from design to product to biz dev and whatnot. But I think for all the founders out there, I've always been a strong proponent of learning like skills that you might not think you should be doing, because it's the best way to help you hire, I think, to find the right people. Because if you're learning how to do performance marketing and you can understand just even a little bit of it, you'll be able to be more kind of insightful and critical of someone who's actually you're going to bring on board or contract or work with, to call them out on their on their BS if they're trying to pull a fast one on you, because you'll know yourself what you've tried to do before. And you'll also be able to learn and appreciate what someone who actually is better at doing that job is doing. So whether it be learning Sketch to design, in Sketch, like, wireframes or whatnot, or you're working with, working on product stuff, I think it's all helpful to kind of get your feet wet in a bunch of different areas, because I think it'll actually make you a stronger founder, especially for hiring. You don't have to be a domain expert in it, but I think uh, if you're completely blind to certain things, like you've never done sales before, and you bring on a sales leader or you bring on someone to do sales for you, and you won't realize till 6 months later, or it's too late, that you've signed this person up, and it's actually detrimental to your speed of building your business if you hire the wrong person who doesn't actually know what they're doing. So I think there's no better salesperson than the founder, and founder-led sales is critical. I think if you guys haven't checked out, Pete Kazanji is a friend and advisor for our company, but he's written. He's actually, his book's going to be published soon, but founder-led sales is his thing, and it's awesome. I think it helps you just realize what you need to grow if you're doing an enterprise business, or even in most marketplaces I'm talking to nowadays. One side is usually a customer that has to pay, and that's usually a business. So you're going to have to sell to those businesses, and figure out SMB or enterprise is very different, and you need different people for that. So after Fanpop, I was taking a break, and I joined my friend Curtis Lee's company, Lux. So I don't know if you guys remember, but we were down in Santa Monica, but
Yeah, I remember seeing it around.
yeah, the original scooter company that was not powered by scooter powered, it was like leg powered, but it was on-demand valet. It was in New York as well, and DC and Philly and Chicago. It was, we launched very quickly, and basically it was like, you could drop a pin as if you're driving somewhere, a valet will come meet you, take your car, park it somewhere, and then you can go somewhere else, and another car, it'll bring your car back to your next location, wherever you call for it. So, unit economics were very tough for that business, but I learned a ton in a very short period of time in terms of acquiring both supply and demand, getting people, car owners and drivers, and then, getting kids and people who would run around on scooters to be valets. And so I also learned very quickly how to launch a new market where you need to build supply before you build demand. And whether it be PR, spinning up PR around it to try to get buzz to build supply and demand in the marketplace, or get liquidity, or it was literally just figuring out how to recruit on Craigslist and other ways, Instagram, whatever it might be. It was awesome, because on someone else's dime, I was learning a lot about kind of building liquidity city by city. And honestly, I think it's one of the hardest things. Local marketplaces are very defensible, but they're also just it's a slog. And when you talk to investors, especially nowadays, I mean, I think a lot of them are turned off by that slog, of going city by city, because it just isn't. It's it's eventually scalable, but you're gonna have to figure out a lot before you get there. And usually, new cities, the burn the payback period is not short for each city. So I think a lot of investors want to see returns faster. And even today, I mean, yesterday there's Uber made an offer for Postmates, and both of them still haven't figured out their unit economics, and they still burn money. So it's very challenging if you're doing a local marketplace, but it's also, it can be very rewarding too, and you learn a lot from each city. So from there, a friend approached me who is a guy who went to Stanford, who went to culinary school after, instead of going to medical school like he was supposed to, and then he went to work at Per Se for Thomas Keller in New York when it opened, and then he went to work at French Laundry, and then he decided to open his own first chain of fast casual restaurants here in San Francisco. And it was solving a problem that he had himself, where people would they would just have to like fire people if people wouldn't show up to work. They have to let go of people, and trying to fill in the gaps of staff was very challenging. So I think we basically set out to solve that problem of, trying to find a way to make sure a restaurant is fully staffed using flexible labor. And we launched, we raised a decent amount of money, and we launched in San Francisco, New York, Philly, and DC. And along the way, learned a lot. It's been 5 years now, and along the way, we've learned a lot about kind of how to get started in a market, but also like the challenges that every market is very different. I've written a few papers or essays about it, about how, unlike Lux, where it was a commoditized marketplace where, a valet is a valet is valet, or Uber and Lyft, where a driver is a driver is a driver. Commoditized labor is much easier to match and fill. Fulfillment rate is much easier when you have that kind of every unit of supply is the same, because all the demand is looking for that same supply. That's much easier to match than what we were doing, which was specialized. Like, hey, you can't. If someone's looking for a dishwasher, you have to have someone who's done dishes. If you're looking for a cook, you need a cook. You can't just like. So you're essentially making a harder problem, because the matching problem is that you have smaller pools of supply to meet that demand, and the demand can come in very differently. So we learned in San Francisco, there's a big higher need for dishwashers, and so you need to supply for dishwashers. In New York, it was more about high skilled line cooks, and so you'd have to supply that way. So at any given time, you're kind of trying to match that supply and demand constantly in different markets. And there's a reason there's high demand. If there's high demand, there's probably not much supply, and you're going to have a hell of a time also trying to find that supply. But if you have a carrot to get them to come, then for us it was getting paid more, and having a flexible schedule was enough carrot to pull people in, so we could attract a lot of kind of folks who otherwise would have, if you're trying to hire them. I think the biggest thing was a lot of restaurants were trying to hire people, or are trying to hire people that are like, hey, I need someone from Monday through Friday, like noon to 8 p.m. And it's like, okay, well, no one has that availability. So you're literally looking for the one person who's like, now there's a lot of people, but before it was is looking for a job right now. And so what we did was we broke up the days, and it's like, hey, this person is available Monday to Friday, but this person's available Monday, this person's available Friday. Like, do you really have to have the same person all week? And I think people open their minds to, hey, like we can't even find a person like 2 days a week, much less 5, so we'll take it. I think in current times, because of COVID, I don't know how many marketplaces have been flipped upside down on their heads, where before it was impossible to find supply for restaurants because there's a labor shortage, and now it's like upside down. It's like everyone's unemployed and they're looking for a job. So we're trying to navigate through this this whole thing, and trying to understand how we can better meet the needs of the restaurants, but in a different way now. So yeah, it's been a lot of learning about how along my path, from just, I think the biggest things I focused on is acquisition of supply and demand. With Lux, it was consumer. With Paired, it's enterprise, or SMBs and enterprise. Very different. It's with consumers, it's Facebook ads, Google ads, whatever it might be. now it's, building a sales team and infrastructure and, setting up, you know, uh, other, you know, completely different way of acquiring demand than we had to before. And then the supply side is a very different population too. Before it was, hey, I can go after college kids who had no skills because anyone can scooter. So it's easier to find someone who can. I mean, if you have a driver's license and can scooter, you could probably become a valet. But now it's looking for skilled restaurant workers that may or may not be easy to find. Right now they're easier to find, but it's a very different problem to solve. But for me, I think, and any I think marketplace founder, it's always understanding the dynamics is almost more important than the audiences or the type of supply and demand. If you know the tools that are at your disposal, and you talk to other, like you guys, I think it's great that this group is here because I think people sharing, even if they're different types of marketplaces. I talk to folks who are hiring for construction, or I advise companies that are doing nursing. But anytime you can kind of just glean a little bit of knowledge from someone else's marketplace, it might be something that's very useful that you can apply to. Because again, um, you know, supply and demand liquidity is the same across all marketplaces. But I mean, at least trying to find that a similar problem, but the type of kind of audiences are different. And I think understanding what people are doing to try to attract their two sides is super valuable to at least think about for your business. And it might not apply at all, but I think even if it's not now, if you start another one, like, it might apply. So it always helps to talk to other marketplace founders, which is why I think it's one of the reasons I started writing my essays, about marketplaces, because I felt like I had so many people asking me questions about marketplaces that I thought, hey, if I can write stuff that would actually help anyone, and I can't talk, I mean, I can't scale myself. The only way I could do is if I share the knowledge across. I guess I can scale a little bit here, but but write it down. Um, I think that's probably the best thing I could do to help other folks. So I think for me, it's been a very interesting wild ride, especially in restaurants. The way things are going now. But I'm also just learning a ton constantly. And even in this existing marketplace, things have turned that I'm focusing on. Before I was focusing on demand, now I got to focus on supply. Like, it's just so you never know, like, what with marketplaces, what's going to happen. So yeah, I think I've learned a lot from all my experiences, and it's helped me a lot. But I think talking to other founders is a very good way to learn.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing more. It's
Yeah.
quite the insights too. So I do actually have a question from the early days of Paired. How just kind of speaking to the point of, since it is a venture-backed startup and you do have a co-founder, how did you guys originally kind of take a problem that you saw from your own needs to then a product, and then really understand like the marketplace kind of dynamics? What were like the early days like for that?
Yeah. Gosh, the early days were like, I guess you always preach the no code. I mean,
Yeah.
we did actually have code, but it was very simple. And I mean, we had the unfair advantage of my co-founder having a restaurant, so we could test it out. And we had people come in, and we could meet the supply in person, and just basically, like people always say, it's true, do the unscalable things first, and figure them out later. But we basically brought people in to interview. We met them in person, we tested their skills, and we put them kind of on a short list. And we knew, hey, this guy can wash, this guy's a dishwasher, this guy's a cook, this guy can do this and that. And then we basically had them, like, in a database. And then we would have a Google spreadsheet that we would match and make offers to, and then copy and paste them into our backend, which would use Twilio to send text messages to these folks. And initially, I didn't even have that. We were literally just manually texting, "Hey, would you like come to this place for $18 an hour from like 9 to 5?" And they would, and then we just pay them out, via like Lob or PayPal or whatever it was at the time. And once we did all those unscalable things, we started building in Stripe, and building in like Lob with paychecks, and using Twilio setup, and then doing the matching in the back end versus on the spreadsheets. But it was a massive spreadsheet with pivot tables with thousands of people on it, that we were just like, okay, we need a dishwasher, sort, filter, pivot, this, that, and then like copy and paste those user IDs and pop them into the back end and spit out the text messages. But it was, it's pretty gnarly, but if you get the right team of scrappy people, you can get that done. And I think that's one thing I'd say is our whole first team, I think the turnover was pretty significant because we were getting I think it's tempting to get people with either fancy degrees or big company experience to be your first kind of team. And they're not always the scrappiest, or willing to do kind of the grunt, like the stuff that nobody wants to do. Um, I actually enjoy that. I think my team, even now, doesn't like that I keep like doing the things like our website. Like I do that. Like others, like I'm doing the Instagram. I run our Instagram. Like
Nice.
I think part of it is part of me is a control freak. The other part is, I mean, I think when you're so passionate about your own company, you just don't want like anything get messed up. So I think I think you have to find the right people to trust, but I think that initial team, you have to find people who are like who have done it before, or like maybe were founders and it didn't work out for them or whatever it might be. But those who can scrap are the ones that can really will really make a difference, because essentially in the beginning you don't have the technology to, so you're not scaling fast. You're literally working with like a handful of customers to prove that there's product market fit. And then when you get to like 20 restaurants, or the Google spreadsheets like causing issues, like you make sure you build like to catch up to that. But yeah, it's definitely the beginning was a grind, and it always is a grind. It's just a different grind.
Yeah. So that you kind of mentioned as far as like the 20 restaurants, right? So just kind of going back a
Yeah,
little bit to the early stages, I'm assuming that the kind of food tech space is incredibly tough. So given that restaurants are so busy, so how was the early days like, selling to the restaurants and getting them on board?
yeah. I think it helped that my co-founder was in restaurants already, so we had a bunch of friendlies that we could start with. I don't think that everyone has that, like has that benefit, because when you're trying to build demand and it's you don't know folks, you're basically begging them to use your product. So it's for us, we were fortunate that we had a bunch of restaurants that were willing to work with us in the beginning, but then it became basically leveraging once you have, and that was our strategy. It was like, hey, once you have a few of those, you can leverage that for social proof and get other customers on. Because you know on this in this world, it's like, hey, if that restaurant's using it and that restaurant's using it, then it's good enough for me. It's the same thing. Like everyone used open table because that was what, like, the top restaurants used. That was their go-to-market strategy was the same. It was like, hey, get the well-known folks on board, and then it'll trickle down because everyone looks up to those as kind of the visionaries and leaders and the thought leaders, and they're like, hey, this open table thing might work. So then they all start using it. So the same for us is like, hey, if we can get the big name restaurants in San Francisco to use it, we can use emails, use phone calls, and just say, hey, by the way, so and so and so and so are using it. They're like, oh, I know them. Yeah, if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. So I think that kind of cascades. But again, the same problem is with local marketplaces, that's not going to cross over to Charleston, right? It won't go do anything for me in Houston. It might help in New York, where there's a lot of kind of transition from people from here to New York or Portland or Seattle maybe, or LA. But that only goes so far. Those networks only go so far. So you have to, one, you leverage the hell out of your network, bug your friends, bug people um, the, never be too proud to ask your friends for help, because you never know who they know. Your network is magnified when you actually like let people know like what you need. And if they, I mean, let's hope they like you, but they'll help you out, because they'll say, hey, oh, but my buddy is the CEO of Kava, or oh, I know the guy from who runs Chipotle, whatever it is. Like that's leverage the hell out of that network, because that's probably the fastest way you can actually get to customers. If you haven't tapped out your network first, then you're wasting time.
No, I love that. So, so speaking of kind of the markets that you guys operate in, you're in San Francisco right now, and then what other markets are you in?
Yeah, so we're in New York, DC, and Philly right now, but we're working on building something new that would allow us to scale like nationwide very quickly.
Mhm.
So I think That's the thing. I think when you're raising capital, the slog is very unattractive. They want to see some kind of enterprise SaaS or some kind of totally digital marketplace that doesn't require building up standing armies in each city. We had the benefit of our pitch never was about having to build a operations team or any kind of having people or boots on the ground in each city, but it was we do have to kind of build supply in each city before we get any demand on. And that meant actually, like we did before, the unscalable meeting people in person, like in person for the first 100 or so cooks and dishwashers, and then launching. And so it didn't cost a ton. You put up a guy in Airbnb from your team, like a launch manager on your team to be in that market and meet those people, and then you can have them leave after a few months after you kind of spun it up. But that's what we did in Philly and DC, and it was fine. It was very cheap. It was still very cheap compared to some other businesses that have to open offices and hire a general manager in each city and do all that, because that is a lot of cash. I mean, it's the burn just like keeps going. And that's one thing I learned from my time at Lux was like, that's what we did there. And when the unit economics don't work in your first city, your most mature city, they're sure as hell not going to work in all your other cities. So you're just like magnifying or extending like the burn much more so by double or tripling it, and for us like 10xing the number of cities that we're trying to get into. But at that time, this was in 2015, investors are all about like winner takes all. You need to go fast, growth. But growth with bad unit economics is a disaster waiting to happen. So I think everyone needs to. I think focusing small nowadays is not a bad thing. You'll get cash if you even just dominate one city and prove that there's something there. Because once you start having to open up multiple markets, then you have to scale the team. You also have to stretch yourself thin. Your networks, might not be as strong. The only reason I always encourage my companies that I advise at our marketplaces to go into other markets is if you think that there's going to be a reasonable doubt from an investor that the only reason you have any traction in that city is because you have connections or it's a very unique situation or unique market. And they'll be like, because San Francisco is always like, oh, you can't prove anything there because it's a weird place. And of course, they try anything. If you try to do this in another city, it's not going to work. But for us, New York's the biggest restaurant city in the world, and proving it in New York means like it could work. Should be able to work anywhere. So I think for myself, it's more about proving that not that just the unit economics work, but the LTV CAC is there, the retention's there. Like get at least signs of life there before you start expanding. I've advised so many founders who are just like, hey, I need to launch in more markets so I can, I think there's a desire for people to prove themselves by launching more markets, but that's not necessarily proving it. Like proving it is getting the LTV CAC, the unit economics, all these things to go in the right direction, at least trend in the right direction, and then get then raise capital and expand. But if you start expanding and you're having to travel or you're having to trust new people to do things, it just becomes much more uncertain. And then you basically have to quickly get distracted by having to go raise more capital because you're burning more, because acquisition in a new market is not cheap. So my advice nowadays, especially in the world we're in now, is like, hey, if you can prove this out like locally or in a market, like that's a good thing. And you have to proving it out means more than just saying you have some customers, because if it costs you $100 to get a customer that pays $10, that's not really proving anything.
Yeah. That's great. So I was actually just to kind of take a step back too, talking about market. So at what point did you guys launch outside of San Francisco?
Our first city we launched in New York was, I want to say, almost 2 years after we launched San Francisco. So we probably were from the time we launched San Francisco was probably about a year and 4 or 5 months before we even launched in New York. So we took that time to make sure, one, the technology, like the matching and everything we had was kind of in good shape. And then also the kind of the customer facing experience was like the logistics and kind of the operational experience was working. So for a lot of marketplaces out there, you won't have to worry about operational logistics, but we did. And so, making sure that like a person will show up on time. They get clock in, clock out, okay. They get paid. Everything gets charged fine. Making sure that all that is working is pretty critical before you kind of want to, and especially in New York, like the last thing we want to do is ruin our reputation because New York people, restaurants talk, they all know each other, and
Yeah.
so you burn a bridge in one place, you're not going to get a second chance from many people. So um, yeah, I mean, I think making sure, and again, that's the beauty of having your network tested out first, or like your friendlies, because you get forgiveness. You're not going to get forgiveness from someone who's paying you a lot of money, and so make sure you kind of get that experience first from your local market, that you've kind of built trust and are they're willing to cut you some slack when things don't work.
Hmm. Nice. And then, so speaking about the kind of market differences between, for instance, San Francisco and New York City, do you guys kind of change your pricing based on the market that you're in, or?
Yeah, it was something that we had considered, and we did when we got into like DC and Philly. But
Mhm.
New York pricing was essentially the same because they had the same challenges that San Francisco did, and they had their minimum wage. We based it off the minimum wage, and so the minimum wage was very similar. So we were basically, one based on minimum wage, but also supply and demand, and there were similar problems. So we priced it the same in both markets.
But, cool. But is there anything, any kind of maybe specific advice or kind of insights that you could share, maybe with founders that are looking, that have raised like an initial round right now, that are kind of balancing investor expectations
Yeah.
of launching in other markets, maybe?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it's hard because you want to find an investor that's aligned with you, but
Yeah.
they're also on your board or possibly, and so they're going to be pushing. Um, you know, I think if you have a savvy investor who understands, especially nowadays, that like unit economics are key. Growth is not necessary until you actually get that right. Um, that's hopefully what you'll have in an investor. So, they'll if you want to push to a new market and you feel like your numbers are there, you want them to be encouraging and supportive of you. But if they're the ones who are pushing you to go into other markets and your numbers are not right, then you need to push back. And I mean, I think, look, they've already cut you the check. Like, do they want you to crash and burn and burn through that quickly without being able to make it or survive to the next stage or the next fundraise? I don't think so. So you have to. I mean, I think if you manage your investors well, you can show kind of what you still need to work on before you get there. And you know, I think if they're pushing you to grow for the sake of growing, um, it's a fine balance. It's like, hey, it always it's I don't like telling people to talk to the next stage of investors, but it's always good to have a few that you're talking to constantly, like not constantly, but um, kind of more frequently, like a long term over a course of like many years, because you never know, who's going to invest. My friend Joel, like he just raised $50 million for his restaurant startup, and they were, I mean, for all intents and purposes, they had trouble. They were going to have trouble raising, but then things turned around during COVID, and they became they allowed people to order takeout, and that took off. And because he had been in conversations with these investors for like years, um, they were able to close around and do everything very quickly because they already had that built-in relationship. So I would say find out or have at least one or two of those folks that you talk to who might be the ones who would lead your next round, even if they're not going to, because they'll tell you what they're looking for. And if they're the ones who are telling you, we don't need you to have 5 cities, we need you to have LTV CAC look like this, or we need your payback period to be this, like they're giving indications of what other investors in that kind of stage will be looking for, because it constantly changes. So if you can get a pulse from them, and talk to others who've already raised those rounds, that I think will be what should be your guidance, not necessarily an investor just telling you to grow for the sake of growing, because that could hurt you a lot.
That's great. So, well, cool. Well, I think we're gonna just start and open up on some questions, if that's good with you.
Yeah, sure.
So, cool. I know we actually so, so Kyle, do you want to come on? I think.
Hey, sorry, I was on mute.
That's okay.
Hey, nice to meet you, Dave.
Hi, Kyle. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, so we have a company that allows people to pre-order from food trucks. So it's similar, kind of like in the restaurant space.
Yep.
And something that we are doing right now is kind of like working and really building up our supply locally before we start to expand to other markets. We have actually preloaded like all the potential food trucks in the US on our platform to kind of like just to prepare us for if we do have to scale. One question I do have for you would kind of be, do you have any advice on like effectively building up your supply? Because our supply is typically the food trucks that are going to be taking orders from us. Right now, we've talked to a bunch of them in the area. We always go and visit them. We do sessions Tuesday and Thursday from like 6 to 7 just to show them how the ordering system works, because it is very different from it's Square and DoorDash and stuff they're using, but it's more tailored for food trucks. So I was wondering, do you have any kind of advice on like how to effectively continue to build that supply and like get them to continue to use the product, because they use it once and they really like it, but sometimes there's like a gap between them using the product first or going back to doing something.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I'm like, we had that same challenge of how do you retention and behavior is probably the most challenging thing for any marketplace. It's like if you're building something that's is trying to change behaviors and they're used to using, like you said yourself, they're using Square and Order Ahead or whatever it is, that they're used to that. And so same for us. It's like restaurants are used to going to Craigslist and hiring people, or they're used to asking their dishwasher, hey, do you have any friends or cousins or whoever need work right now, like to fill in a shift next week? Changing behavior is probably like the most difficult thing that you're going to have to figure out. But I think I would stick to what you're doing, like by spending time with them on Tuesday and Thursday. Just remember, don't like, I think that's the right thing to understand, like what, like how they're using it or how they're perceiving it. But at the same time, I would keep finding out why, like, ask them maybe why they're not using it like regularly. But I think you have to also go to other new users and like have them see how their experience is, because I think that first aha moment of and that clicking, it usually takes like 2 or 3 times. Like you have to watch the patterns of usage and see that, hey, if they're not using it 2 to 3 times the first week, then they're like, look at all the patterns and see, like, does the data say that if they don't use it, it's the same as on Facebook. If you have, if you add, was it like 7 friends, then you're going to be addicted to Facebook. On Pinterest, if you pin 10 things, you're going to use Pinterest every day. But for you, it's like, hey, are these folks actually going to our app? If they use it 3 times a week, then they start using it every every week after consistently, like every day. But what is that number you have to get them to, and figure out, how do I get them there? Is there, like, what is that kind of threshold that we need to build habit? And you need to test that with not just the people that you're working with regularly, but brand new people, to see and tweak whatever like UX you need or incentives to get them to use it. That and ultimately they're going to use it. If you bring them customers, they're going to use it. So I would say also, like, don't focus so much on the user experience, because like you can have the shittiest user experience, but if you bring them more customers than anyone else does, they're going to figure out how to use it. It could be a piece of paper for all they care, but you're bringing them revenue. So I think if you are able to just get them the demand they want, that may solve all problems. But again, if there's a consistent breakdown in the usage, it may just be because there might be something in the UX or some other kind of part of the process that's too challenging for them to use, and you need to figure that out too. But again, people will break through walls if they can get customers. So if you can figure that part out, that might be what drives. Like, don't focus so much more on their experience and focusing on like them getting more customers to make it a good experience. Because yeah, I think that's probably more key than anything.
Okay, yeah, that definitely makes sense. I mean, we have seen some spike in usage after, of course, after people get
And it makes
used.
sense, right?
Yeah.
You have to think about, like, for us, it's if we get a restaurant, like an amazing dishwasher or cook in the last minute, like they'll keep using us because they're like, hey, we had a magical experience and there's something they needed and they wanted and they got it. If a food truck needs like customers and they need it and they want it and they get it, they're going to use your product again. So I think focusing on like the most critical desire of the customer is probably the best thing you could do.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Awesome. That's a great question too.
Yeah.
Cool. So I know we have another one. It's Jack. You wanna come on?
Yeah. Hey, how's it going, Dave?
Hey, Jack.
So I have a marketplace that connects advertisers to event organizers to streamline like in-person customer acquisition campaigns. So kind of like it's an ad network for in-person events. And our launch vertical was the collegiate market, which obviously was affected by COVID. And so we have shifted our supply focus into acquiring drive-in concerts, drive-in events, virtual 5K, 10K opportunities. So it kind of forced us to move outside a little earlier than we were planning out of like a launch vertical. But now that we're doing it, we're seeing like a lot of exciting growth and scale on the supply side that we didn't have before, and we're kind of market constrained. So I was just kind of curious around, you mentioned like direct sales. We're doing a decent amount of that, like more like scaled outreach on the event organizer side, and then also going to mainly like larger brands and advertisers, but targeting kind of bottom up. But I was curious, like you mentioned, signing the supply up before having demand. Like, were you offering any single player tools, or was it just kind of like they were kind of bought into your launch and it's coming? And then I guess beyond that, like, just curious if there's any growth channels that you're like currently focused on, and then other ones you decided to, for whatever reason, like not focus on at all.
Yeah. So your first question, I think the single player mode, for us, the single player mode was basically, we were offering, like, they could come, it was like found money for them. If someone was a dishwasher and they just flipped on their phone, they could see jobs around them for $20-$30 for that night to go do a gig, $20-$30 an hour that night. And like, hey, like that in of itself is like gonna attract people and they're gonna talk about it. So for us, I think, that worked for us. Other folks, I think there is, if you don't have, there's a chicken and egg problem. If you don't have the demand, then you're not going to be able to attract the supply. So we're fortunate. Yeah.
And I guess my question was more around the supply, because you mentioned you would go into a market, you would sign up those places. Were you like, hey, we're gonna have the demand and this is gonna turn on, or was there something the suppliers could do from like a single player perspective?
Oh yeah, no. So just to be clear, our supplier, the labor, and the demand is the restaurants. Sometimes people like think of it differently. Yeah. So supply is the cook. So we actually we had to find the supply first in every market. So supply is in, we have to find the labor first, because we can't go to a restaurant and say, hey, book with us and we'll get you some folks, and we have nobody to fill their shifts. Like, we had to have a critical mass of kind of labor before we turned it on the other side. So we didn't even approach restaurants until we hit that. And then we said, hey, but we warmed them up beforehand saying, hey, at this point we'll be able to, but so you can do it somewhat in parallel, but you need to onboard these folks, get them, the app, and make sure that they're familiar. A lot of them, they're happy if they start seeing gigs right away, but it's not urgent for them. But for the restaurant, it'll be very urgent because they need someone like tomorrow or next week or today. And so for us, it was about getting the labor on first and then going to the van. Because again, the people who are paying, they want to have a good experience. So like they're if you go to customers and you don't have any supply for them and they're like, hey, I need a dishwasher tonight and you failed me, like I'm never using it again and I'm not telling anyone about this thing. So for us, it was very much about, you always have to, build up one side before the other. And there was no, for us, we were like, I see what you're saying for the labor side, we could have built something along the kind of single player mode side, but I think for them, it was just nice to have an option for potential income. And so we even did some like unscalable things, that same thing as Uber did. Like we had them do shifts at our like at some of our local friendly restaurants, and we just paid them to do those shifts so that they'd be interested. They're like, oh, okay, like I'm on call, or I'm still getting work from this. So it's like Uber, when Uber started, they just had drivers that they were paying on call. And so you just have to have some kind of keep them engaged somewhat, because if it takes too long, they're going to delete the app and forget about you. So you have to, make sure you get that timing right.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And I think you asked what other channels, it differs all the time. Like even this like last 2 weeks, I was trying Reddit as a supply, because as a acquisition channel, because it's cheap. Nobody's really using it that much, but there are a lot of people on there. I know that there's actually a Kitchen Confidential group that has like 300,000 folks who are, I don't know if they all work in restaurants, but a lot of them do, because the topics in there are very much that. But the CPMs are really low. So basically trying to find places that most people aren't thinking about, but not just for cost purposes, but like if they're exhausted from seeing Instagram ads, they're just they're starting to ignore them. So you have to look at new channels. Again, I'm all about SEO. PR helps, but PR is near impossible to generate yourself if you want to get good coverage. We've been very fortunate to get in the New York Times and the Washington Post and like Bloomberg, but a lot of that was all kind of inbound because it was trendy and topical at the time. For you, like being in the event biz, I think that's pretty topical too, because there's a lot of event businesses that will not be able to get through this. So being kind of that expert, or someone who's talking to a lot of them, like press, like talking to folks like that, so you can get your name out there that way too. But again, PR is usually just a blip. If you're really going to do it, you have to find something that's kind of scalable, and the best way to do it is word of mouth from the people that use you. There's no better way than kind of that word of mouth and referrals, even if you have to pay for it, because those are your salespeople. That's your sales force. Inside sales, direct sales, like they cost a lot of money, and again, there's no guarantee that they're going to be the best salespeople for you either. So your happy customers are always the best way to get to get new customers.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, man.
Yep.
Awesome. I think Dan, do you want to come on? Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. This is great, by the way.
Oh yeah, no worries.
So my name's Dan. My marketplace is called Book Yaya. I'm doing it with my wife. It's a live appearance marketplace for professional authors to do live appearances, paid live appearances with readers. It's inspired by an offline version thing. My wife has been doing a literary salon for over 20 years. She created it. It used to be broadcast on NPR. And for years, I noticed that I always thought it would scale well as a marketplace, empower writers to basically monetize their fans. And we're new, but we're operational. And for the first time, my wife basically used her email list of her reading series to send it out and say our events are now virtual and they're going to be through the marketplace, Book Yaya. And it has created a really amazing blip. All of a sudden, there's a huge user sign up, and we're making a lot of transactions, I'm noticing. And I'm realizing that might be, her literary series doesn't make any money from it, really. What they do is they're just putting she's sending an email out, but she's helping the authors, and the authors similarly are helping her. So it's this really interesting three-way thing, even though it's non-monetary in that way. And the authors are standing to make a lot of money all of a sudden. And so I'm discovering, this is only in the last few days, that it's a remarkable little activator. And I'm thinking that I need to identify the organizations like my wife's reading series all around the country, whether they're independent bookstores with email lists, or reading series, or schools that have alumni email lists they want to engage with and help the author. And this is sort of an observation that I have right now, but I'm wondering if it spurs any interesting thoughts or similarities that you've seen in studying marketplaces.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because it sounds, and it's not similar, but like Patreon, my friend's company Patreon has been doing this for music artists and whatnot. And I think even I've seen articles even saying that like Patreon, there will be a, just like, there'll be a breakup of LinkedIn and people who are focused on verticals on LinkedIn. Like you can't, artists cannot be all kind of captured in one broad kind of general, like, platform. So having a verticalized version for authors is and writers is a very different experience than a musician. So I think there's definitely a lot there that I totally get. I think scaling it virtually is I don't know if that's how you guys were doing it before, but COVID definitely helped with that. But I think yeah, you can't scale an author going to like doing the book tours already were exhausting as it is. So but I think for yourself, there's a lot of when I think about what you're doing, it seems like there's social is like with influencers and social. There's a huge like way of acquisition, a means of acquisition that for these folks that has been unparalleled. Like especially at this time when people are stuck at home, and I feel like being able to enable that easily through Instagram or through, because they have the ability to purchase, and again, this is like just my thinking out loud about what you're doing, but it seems like you have to the same way we're trying to tap into existing networks, like you have people who have fan bases already, so all you're giving them is a tool set. This is again single player mode, like give me a way to like monetize my fan base, and what I don't know what I have to do for them. Like they might want me to just do a reading, they might want me to do something else, but there's like this whole read a lot of the content from Lee Jin from Andreessen.
Passion economy.
Yeah, it's all about the passion economy. Lee's been great about writing this. And I don't know if you're looking for investors, but she's starting her own fund too. So there's I think there's a lot around people like Substack and all these people who are building their like monetizing their followings. And for you, I would say there are a lot of Facebook groups and existing groups like Reddit and other places. These communities are all just sitting there waiting. I think when I did Fanpop, it was all organic content because we had long tail traffic from anyone searching the most random things. But because it was user generated, it could be like about a random character in Harry Potter, some obscure character, but there was a huge following around that one character. But that's how people found us, because they would Google it and it would show up first in results because it was all long tail. If you're trying to compete for organic for anything else, it's going to be tough because you'll show up as the 100th result. But I think with this, it's like, hey, if you can help folks kind of one, monetize, but two, continue to aggregate more folks on that list and figure out like what else they should be writing, like what they should be working on. I think that's it works both ways. It's huge both ways. So I think building that tool set between the two, beyond just when I built communities for Fanpop, it was asking, like polling and all these kind of tools to find out from their fan base that they could use to kind of understand what they should be working on, or kind of just, it's not milking your fan base, but it's like, hey, they want to tell you everything, right? They have so many thoughts. They're writing fan fiction. They idolize you. Like get them to give as much as they're getting. But I think it's just, obviously they're nothing without their readers. So creating a symbiotic relationship with the tools that you create will keep them around longest. I think that's what Patreon has done really well. But for writers, I think it's very different. And then again, the perk of being able to get into a Zoom session like with them might be huge. I think we just had it for our on Friday we had a magician do from Seattle do a setting for our team during like after all hands, and it's like when I look through the Airbnb experiences, I mean, people are monetizing stuff from Italy and India and other places. Like, hey, like there is a way to do this right, and I think your timing is great for it, because I feel like so many more people now, especially if they're stuck at home, are writing more. Like, hell, I'm nobody. I've written a few essays, but like Mike asked me to speak because I don't know why, but because I have some experience in this. But again, the fact that people are willing to listen to me is there's long tail for everyone. So I would say that you definitely have to tap into their audiences, whether it be through social or find their groups on Facebook or whatnot. But the communities exist already out there. They found each other. Now you got to find them, and they're really fragmented. But you just gotta figure out a way to easily aggregate them for the authors, and I think you'll be onto something.
Thank you.
That was great. I really, I appreciate it, Dave. You're definitely selling yourself short as far as your essays. Those are super insightful, and
Thank you.
This conversation definitely topped them. I'll have to say that. So we're almost out of time. But just is there any kind of like last mention that you might have for the group that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I mean, again, if I'm still always looking for ideas to write about. If there's questions that are helpful, like I think for me, and I would actually encourage everyone else to write too. I didn't get into writing this stuff until it actually helped me formulate my thoughts and organize them, because there's so much when you're building your company that you just are scrambling every day that you don't have time to go 10,000 feet, 50,000 feet and actually like think about all the stuff that you're learning and seeing. But when you do so, it actually helps crystallize more about what you should be focusing on your company too, or be asking for help, or you might notice things that you might not notice because you're too in the weeds. So I would say, I think taking that pause and that exercise to actually write down all the things you're learning and your thoughts about kind of the strategy or the bigger picture will help you more clearly understand not just your business, but maybe connect you with other people. Because since I started writing, it's connecting with other people that have reached out to talk about things. But those have totally spurned ideas for myself too. So definitely, like I said before, talking to other founders helps, other marketplace thought leaders. But don't. So again, I'm selling myself short because I'm trying to be humble about it. But like, write. It'll bring people to you that you never thought you'd actually meet before. I didn't use Twitter till last year, and then I started writing some stuff, and now I'm like met Mike and met Lenny and other folks, and it's been pretty cool to see. Lee is like now a good friend, and just that opens doors not just for ideas and conversations, but for investors and for all along your journey that will help. So make sure, I know you have to focus on like, this is not to say that it's not focusing on your business is not fair, because it is helping you focus on your business because you're thinking on a bigger picture, but it's also opening doors to help fund your business. So it's easy to get kind of heads down in your own kind of smaller problems. But if you can pull out and pull back, it might actually help you kind of organize your time and resources better, and think about the bigger problems that you're facing.
Nice. Well, I don't think we could have ended it on a better note. So we already have someone asking in the chat where we can find your essay. So where's the best way that we can keep up with you?
They're all on my Medium, and so if you go to Medium, Dave Liu, all my essays and work are there. And then on Twitter, follow me on Twitter if any new stuff comes out. I haven't done a Substack yet because I don't have time to write that much, but yeah, you can check out all my stuff there.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Dave. This was super helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and end the recording, and then I'll upload it and share it with the group.